Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about what is my favorite and what I think overall is best alternative for your Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. And in my opinion, it is this little piece of hardware right here, the ZACRO Nintendo Switch Pro Controller Mount. Now, first things, I've seen this branded under a couple of different names, but the one I got was really branded as a ZACRO Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. If you want to be sure that you're getting the exact same one I'm showing in the video today, I will be leaving an affiliate link down below, so you can always use that if you want to make sure you're getting the exact same one. But yes, I am aware that I did see it branded under a couple of different names on Amazon, but the ZACRO brand is really the one that comes up most often and generally comes up first when you search out this type of controller. Now, first of all, I just want to be clear. I know that when we're looking for Joy-Con alternatives, in my opinion, there are two types of Joy-Con alternatives. You have companies that are trying to simulate the exact experience you get from a standard Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, although at a cheaper price. Now, I know that today the ZACRO Nintendo Switch Pro Controller is not in that category. This is in the second category of Joy-Con alternatives, which is that the company is trying to basically do something different and actually cater to a different audience than the people who are looking for exact replacements for Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. But ultimately, the reason why this is my favorite and what I'm going to say is the best alternative is that I do think that most people will be better served with something like this than actually buying maybe a second set of Joy-Cons or even a Joy-Con alternative that is trying to simulate the exact Joy-Con. And if I try to explain why that is, well, first of all, the Joy-Cons are some great little pieces of tech. However, as we know, there are a few problems with them. Number one, the left side Joy-Con does not have a D-pad, it has 4 different buttons. Because ultimately this was made so that you could detach it, hand it to 2 different players, and when you're holding it like this, well, each player has 4 action buttons. However, most people, to my knowledge, aren't really playing 2-player games in tabletop mode, each holding a Joy-Con. Some people are, and if your Joy-Cons are still there and still working, you'll still be able to do it. But most people who are using Joy-Cons on a regular basis, it's because they're using their Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. So having a D-pad rather than 4 separate buttons is a much better experience, and even Nintendo themselves on the Nintendo Switch Lite put a D-pad on because you no longer need that option to be able to detach the Joy-Con and use it as a second controller. And also, I spoke about this a little bit in last week's video where I was reviewing the Oivo Nintendo Switch grip. Basically, playing your standard Nintendo Switch with Joy-Cons in handheld mode without a grip, in my opinion, isn't a very pleasant experience. It's okay for quick gaming sessions, or I would say even for children that have small hands, but if you're an adult with adult-sized hands, or just medium-sized to large hands, well, unfortunately, especially your right hand, if your game uses the right joystick a lot, you're gonna have to use a claw grip to get to that joystick without having a grip installed on your Nintendo Switch. And after long gameplay sessions, that right hand is going to start getting sore, and over time, you're really going to want to purchase a grip. And ultimately, if you're already looking for alternatives to Joy-Cons, this thing is only $30 to $35, and it gives you the combination of replacement Joy-Cons and a grip at the same time. And the final ultimate reason, before we get into the close-up, because by the way, I'm going to be doing a close-up on this so you get a really good idea of what this is offering. We're going to be putting the Switch in it. You're going to get a really good overview of the product. But I just wanted to go into the reasons first, ultimately, why I'm saying that this is a better alternative for a lot of people. And ultimately, the elephant in the room that everyone always talks about is Joy-Con drift. So ultimately, if you know that Joy-Con drift is an issue that could come up, looking for Joy-Con replacements or simulated Joy-Cons that might overall have the same problem, I prefer putting my money on something like this that costs only $30 to $35. Look, it might drift after a while, just like any controller that has joysticks might drift, but it feels a lot better replacing this for another $30 to $35 and having that combination grip and Joy-Con than ultimately putting $60 on these, having to buy a grip separately, and knowing that you might have the problem again in another year and a half. But anyway, those were the major first reasons why I wanted to explain to you But anyway, those were the major points I just wanted to go over before we took a close-up view at the product itself, so you understand where I'm coming from when I'm saying that this, in my opinion, is the best alternative to Joy-Cons, or a better alternative ultimately. So just before we get to the close-up of the product, as usual, don't forget that if you do end up liking this video, please do hit the like button on the video. It really does help out a lot. And also subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. But now let's take a look at what this controller is offering. So as usual, I always like to take a few seconds to take a quick look at the box. First of all, very simple branding by ZACRO. You get an image of the controller. It does indicate that the major functions is that it is compatible with fast charging. It does have dual vibration motors built in, so vibration is compatible with it. It does support playing while charging. And lastly, there is some 6-axis gyro that is also built into the controllers, so you do not lose your motion controls with this setup. So the sides of the box are pretty standard with just a little bit of branding. We're not going to take too much time on that. And the back has a breakdown of all the different buttons and functions, and also how to get it to work with your Nintendo Switch. But we're actually going to be looking at that at the end of the close-up session, so you'll be getting exactly an idea how to get this working on your Nintendo Switch. So here we have the ZACRO controller itself. So first, let's just break down the major parts. Number one, you have the two joysticks. You have the left one that is rubberized, while the right one has a plastic feeling. But something you can't tell at first about the right one is that you can actually change the knob on the right side joystick to either have a concave one, like the one I had installed, a convex one, basically, which is a second option, or even one of my favorite options of this controller, you can actually switch it for a C-stick when you're playing, for example, Smash Brothers, to really get the feeling of a standard C-stick. And also really quickly, if you see any marks on my left side joystick, it's just because I have a new puppy at home, and unfortunately I wasn't paying attention for a few seconds and he managed to chew on the rubber on my left side joystick, but normally those little notches are not there. But other than that, we have all the buttons needed. Number one, we have the Y, X, B, and A, which are, I would still say, even though it doesn't seem so at first, fairly larger than on the standard Joy-Cons, which is something I appreciate because I do find the buttons on the standard Joy-Cons to be a little bit on the small side. Then we have the plus button, minus button, home button, and capture button, which are placed almost similarly to where they are on the Joy-Cons, only the plus and minus, rather than being at the top, are shifted to the bottom, which after using this controller for a while, you'll see why that is. It's a fairly big stretch to try to get the plus button at the top, while it's much easier to hit it right here at the bottom. So it is overall a better placement once you get used to where they are. Now, lastly, we have the D-pad, which is actually much better than I thought it was going to be. I was expecting a cheap feeling, very mushy D-pad, but no, it is very clicky, it is very responsive. The only thing, and I'll sort of get to this in the conclusion, is that rotating motions on the D-pad aren't the best. But other than that, for platformers or for any other game, I would say other than 2D fighters, this D-pad is an excellent D-pad. Now at the top view, we really get the triggered feeling from the ZL and ZR buttons, which is really fun because I wouldn't want them to be smaller buttons. I really like when they keep that trigger feeling for the back buttons. And the R and L buttons are well placed, and they are all digital triggers, so it is very clicky, it is very responsive, and as you know, the standard Switch normally doesn't recognize analog triggers, so I am happy that they put digital triggers on both one of the buttons. And lastly, what we can see here for the top is you can see that each side is notched here. So your Switch tablet is really gonna be inserted inside the Joy-Con, which means that basically there's no way for the tablet to flip forward. It really fits right here into each side notched. And lastly, from the front view, we have the USB-C pass-through right here, which basically plugs into the bottom of your Switch. And the charge port is right here at the bottom, so you're able to charge your Switch without taking it out of this whole setup. Now, the last thing I sort of want to show you before we install the Switch and look at the different functions is that there's a little notch here on the inside, and this really locks the Switch tablet into place. If we look at the back now, you have a corresponding button here that you have to press down when you want to release your Switch. And that is something that is really, really well thought out, because having the Switch tablet lock into place means you don't have to worry about it flopping out from the top either. So even if you put this thing upside down, there's no way your Switch tablet is falling out of it. So here it is with the Switch tablet inserted. Now, I said we would go over the functions really quick. So I did point it out when we were looking at the box, but there are vibration motors in this. They are not haptic feedback, they are standard vibration, but they still feel pretty decent. They do feel a little rougher than the standard Joy-Cons because, once again, as I said, they are not haptic feedback, but nonetheless, it still doesn't, you don't lose out on your vibration experience because there are vibration motors integrated. Secondly, the motion controls. The 6-axis gyro is still available in this controller as well and works just fine. I've tested out in Mario Kart and a lot of the other games, and the motion controls work just fine with this controller. The sort of only thing that's important to note is that you cannot wake up your Switch with the home button. When you have this inside in the holder, you have to press the power button at the top to activate it. So basically, if I want to turn the Switch on, I don't press the home button. You just have to press the power button at the top. That is an issue when you're using like a controller or a wireless controller, because you have to get up and, press the button on your Switch. But since this is being used in handheld mode, I really don't see it as an issue because, it's just using a different button. Now, the last thing I want to show you in close-up mode is basically how to get this thing working when you first get it. Because if you have your default settings on your standard Nintendo Switch, there's a strong chance that if you just plug this thing in to your Switch without making any modifications, it won't work right out of the box. Now, the instructions are right on the box itself, but nonetheless, I'm going to show them to you right here. It's really important that you go to your system settings on your Nintendo Switch. You go to the controller and sensors section, and you make sure that the Pro Controller wired communication here is set to on. If you set it to off, look, the controller is no longer working. You just click it, by the way, and you can put it back to on, and your controller works no problem. So before even plugging this thing into your Nintendo Switch, it is a good idea to come here and put Pro Controller wired communication to on, because this thing is recognized as a Pro Controller that has been connected by wire to your Nintendo Switch. But it is no more complex than that. That is all you have to do to get this to work with your Nintendo Switch. So now that we have that product overview done, let's talk about my gameplay experience. So first of all, I got this thing about a month and a half ago. And other than the 2 weeks that I used to test the Oivo grip over the holidays, I've been using this thing exclusively to play in handheld mode. And ultimately, that winds up being 70% or more of my playtime. Because other than when I'm getting gameplay captures for a video or for a review, I am basically always playing in handheld mode or tabletop mode sometimes. And in total honesty, the fact that I've been using this now for a month and a half exclusively in handheld mode isn't only for testing purposes. It's because from now on, till I find something better, this is my favorite way of playing in handheld mode with a standard Nintendo Switch. Now, just in case it's not clear, because of the overall design, this is not compatible with a Switch Lite. So if you do have a Switch Lite, please do not buy this controller thinking that you can plug a Switch Lite into it. The size of it just doesn't fit with the Nintendo Switch Lite. Now, I'm not going to repeat all the reasons I did at the beginning of the video, but the primary reason why I love this thing so much in handheld mode is because it is basically fixing all the problems I have with the standard Joy-Cons. Number one, because of its grip style, basically my hand is perfectly placed on the right side joystick. And also I'm getting a D-pad rather than those 4 separate buttons. And ultimately, this thing allows me to play in handheld mode pretty much every type of game out there. There's only one type of game that I maybe want to warn you that isn't still perfect with this type of grip, and that is standard 2D fighters. For standard 2D fighters, I'm talking about my Street Fighters, I'm talking about my Dragon Ball Fighters and whatnot. that I'm still using tabletop mode with a separate controller. Simply because this D-pad is actually very, very good for platformers and when you need to put individual directions. However, rocking motions, as are very current in fighting games, I don't find this D-pad feels quite as good as a standard controller for rocking motions. Smash Brothers, however, is another story. This thing is excellent for Smash Brothers. I had a lot of trouble playing Smash Brothers with standard Joy-Cons and a grip, but with this thing, especially the fact that you can swap out the second joystick for a C-stick, makes my Smash Brothers experience excellent with this thing. But that doesn't make this thing perfect. There are maybe 2 points I'd like to bring up, especially because I brought them up when I was talking about the Switch grip last time, and it's things that I really started appreciating when I started using the Oivo Switch grip that this is not offering. And if they would integrate these 2 elements, I'm pretty sure this would become like the perfect overall Nintendo Switch Joy-Con / grip alternative. And the first thing is a stand to be able to use this in tabletop mode. Because if you haven't realized it yet, there's no way to stand this up on its own. You do need some type of stand or something else to be able to stand it up. So unfortunately, if they would integrate some kind of stand or even just a kickstand at the back, because unfortunately when it's in this, you can't use the Switch's kickstand itself, you would have a version that could actually rotate to tabletop mode and would just make this a way better experience for someone who likes to rotate between handheld and tabletop mode. And the second thing that would actually be super easy to integrate as well, and that I didn't even know was something I would be missing before trying out the Oivo grip, is a little bit of game storage. They could easily on the back of this thing just put a little plastic adjustment here where you could actually pop in a cartridge or 2. Just because when you're walking around the house and you're swapping between 1 or 2 or maybe 3 different games, it's actually fun to have some storage on the grip itself that would allow you to put the games in. And with the overall design on this, with a very slight modification, it'd be very easy to integrate a little bit of storage like that. But let's be honest, I'm nitpicking right now because ultimately the primary function of this, in my opinion, works excellent. The only thing is that I'm still pointing out a couple of things that could be done to this to make it like the perfect overall Nintendo Switch, Joy-Con accessory. But ultimately, my conclusion is this. If you're a person who is looking for Joy-Con alternatives that has medium to large hands and that ultimately plays a big variety of games, this, in my opinion, so far is the best alternative I've found. It is more comfortable than the Joy-Cons. It is cheaper than the Joy-Cons, and ultimately it fixes most of the issues that you have with some types of games like platformers that need a D-pad and whatnot. Pretty much most of those concerns are resolved with the ZACRO Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. So I'm not going to rattle on and on anymore. I'm pretty sure you got a just feeling for what this can offer and if this is something that is good for you. I'd like to hear from you in the comments down below. So if you do pick this up and like it or don't like it, let me know in the comments below. If you do have other alternatives you'd like me to eventually test out, you can always leave those in the comments as well. And if I can get to them, I will. But as I said at the beginning of the video, if you did end up liking the video, please do hit the like button. It helps out a lot. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when all my new content comes out. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.